All right, today we're jumping into the pretty wild and, let's be honest, often contradictory story of Georgia. We're going to explore how a colony that was born from this really idealistic vision for social reform completely transformed into a key battleground, first for an empire and then for a new nation itself. So, yeah, let's get right into it. And really, this is the main question we're tackling. See, Georgia's history isn't some straight, simple line. Nope. It's this incredible chain of cause and effect where a utopian experiment, a really noble idea, just crashed head-on into the powerful forces of economics, global politics, and, plain old human ambition. Okay, so to really get Georgia's story, we have to hit rewind. Way back, long before any European ships ever showed up. This land was already home to some incredibly complex and established societies, especially the Creek civilization down in the south and the powerful Cherokee Nation up in the northern mountains. And what's truly amazing is just how sophisticated these societies were. I mean, we are not talking about simple nomadic groups here. These were powerful confederacies with really intricate social systems, like the matrilineal structure of the Cherokee. They had organized governments, rich spiritual traditions, and honestly some ingenious farming techniques like the Three Sisters. That's planting corn, beans, and squash together so they actually help each other grow. Super smart. So into this well-established world come the Europeans, and they're driven by that famous trio of motives you've probably heard of: God, glory, and gold. But here's the thing, and this part is crucial. Different empires prioritize these goals in vastly different ways, and that, right there, would set the stage for completely different results on the ground. So let's just compare the two big players in the area. You had Spain, whose main goal was really conquest and conversion. They used Catholic missions to take direct political control. Britain, on the other hand, was playing a longer game. Theirs was all about permanent settlements and making as much money as possible. These are just two fundamentally different blueprints for how to build a colony. For the native peoples, the arrival of the Spanish wasn't just a meeting of cultures. It was a devastating turning point. I mean, invisible enemies like smallpox, something they had absolutely no immunity to, led to this catastrophic drop in population. And this tragic loss of life, which shattered their political systems, was combined with a very deliberate effort by Spanish missions to erase their traditional beliefs. The disruption was just profound, and it was permanent. And all of this brings us to the formal creation of Georgia. By the 1730s, Britain looked at the map, saw Spain to the south and France to the west, and decided it needed a new colony right there. So Georgia's founding wasn't an accident at all. It was a very deliberate, very calculated move on the big geopolitical chessboard. The official charter for Georgia back in 1732 laid out three main goals. First, it was about philanthropy, giving England's deserving poor a brand new start. Second, it was about economics. The hope was they could produce stuff like silk and indigo that England couldn't grow. And third, and this was probably the most important one, it was about defense. Georgia was meant to be a military buffer protecting the super wealthy colony of South Carolina from the Spanish down in Florida. But having a royal charter on paper doesn't guarantee you'll succeed. The survival of that first settlement, Savannah, depended entirely on smart diplomacy. The negotiations between James Oglethorpe and Tomochichi, the leader of the Yamakrat people, were absolutely essential. And honestly, those critical talks couldn't have even happened without the invaluable work of Mary Musgrove, who served as this vital cultural and linguistic bridge between the two worlds. So, the colony is up and running. But almost right away, the founder's very noble, idealistic vision starts to clash with the tough realities of life in the colonies. And pretty soon, the settlers themselves began to push back against the very rules that were supposed to create this perfect little society. For the first 20 years, Georgia was run by a board of trustees, not by the king. And they had a bunch of strict rules. Slavery was totally banned. You could only own a small plot of land. Even booze was restricted. The whole idea was to create a community of hardworking, small-time farmers and to deliberately stop a rich slave-owning planter class from taking over, like they'd seen happen in South Carolina. But yeah, not everyone was on board with this plan. A group of dissenters, who became known as the malcontents, started getting louder. They'd look right across the border to South Carolina, with its huge rice plantations and all the money being made off of enslaved labor, and basically said, hey, these strict rules are holding us back from getting rich too. And in the end, the malcontents won. In 1752, the trustees gave up their charter, and Georgia was turned into a royal colony. The change was fast, and it was total. The ban on slavery was lifted, the limits on land ownership disappeared, and the colony's entire economy just flipped to being based on the large-scale plantation system. This one decision would basically define Georgia's path for the next century.
Okay, now let's zoom out for a second. Because this massive global power struggle between Britain and France, a war happening thousands of miles away, is about to send shockwaves straight across the Atlantic. And those shockwaves are going to hit Georgia directly and set the stage for revolution.
This sequence of events is just a perfect domino effect. So Britain wins the French and Indian War, but now they are buried in debt. To fix their money problems, Parliament decides to directly tax the American colonies, starting with the Stamp Act. And that one move ignites a massive firestorm, all rallying around one powerful idea: no taxation without representation. And it is so important to understand this. For the colonists, this was never really about the cost of a stamp on a piece of paper. It was about a fundamental principle. Who gets to govern us? Who has the right to take our money through taxes? At its heart, this was a fight for control and for self-determination.
But Georgia was totally split on this. As the newest colony, it still relied heavily on Great Britain for money and military protection. So loyalty to the king, the loyalist side, was really strong, especially on the coast around Savannah. The revolutionary spirit, the Patriots, was mostly concentrated in the inland backcountry. This deep internal divide is what made Georgia such a brutal and fiercely fought-over place during the war.
So after a very long, very hard war, the colonies win their independence. But that victory came with an even bigger challenge. How do you build a totally new government from scratch? It was a problem that would force them to learn from their own mistakes, and fast. Georgia made its official commitment to independence when 3 of its own, Button Gwinnett, Lyman Hall, and George Walton, signed the Declaration of Independence. And that document, it did more than just declare a breakup with England. It laid out a whole new philosophy of government based on rights, listed all their complaints against the king, and flat out declared that they were now free and independent states. Now, the country's first shot at a government, the Articles of Confederation, created a very weak central government on purpose. I mean, that was a direct reaction to living under a powerful king. But it just didn't work. The government couldn't effectively collect taxes or manage trade, and it led to total economic chaos. The Articles were such a failure that they directly caused the creation of the U.S. Constitution, which set up a much, much stronger federal government. And that, right there, is the thread that runs through this whole story. You see it, right? A global conflict creates the need for a buffer colony. A utopian dream collapses and makes way for a plantation economy. A war on another continent leads to new taxes, which sparks a revolution. And the failure of a first government leads directly to the Constitution we still have today. It's all connected. Which leaves us with a really fascinating question to think about. What if that first domino had fallen differently? What if the trustees' original vision, a colony with no slavery and no giant plantations, had actually worked? How might the history of Georgia, and maybe even the history of America itself, have been completely and profoundly different? It's a powerful thought to end on.